We welcome you today. Today's workshop number 6, and it's Marvelous Monarchs. And before I introduce a couple folks here, I just want to thank you all for coming. And those of you who've heard me say this before, I'll keep it really brief. I want to thank anybody who is or who has a family member who is a first responder. They're giving a great service to our community at large, and if you could pass on our good wishes and our many thanks, that would be fantastic. Also want to just say, for those of you who don't know, ESLT is a nonprofit based here in Bishop, and we work to protect private lands with willing landowners, and we do it a couple different ways. And if you've got more questions, please give me a call. I don't want to take time now to go over that, but if you have any questions, please email me or call me, and I'll be glad to talk to you about our work. On just some logistics here, there is a chat box here, so if you have any questions or problems during the meeting, if you click the chat, with most folks, depending on your configuration, it's at the bottom of your screen, and if you hit chat, a whole nother box opens up, and you can write anything you want in there, and Marie and I will keep an eye on that and make sure if you've got questions, just because we have got a robust group, if you have questions during Michelle's presentation, you can either write them or raise your hand, and Michelle will tell you her preference on if she wants it during or after. And there will be a time to answer things at the end. And I want to now introduce just briefly, because Marie will introduce Michelle more, but Michelle came in when this program, our Pollinator Garden program, was just brand new and getting off the ground, and helped us through U.S. Fish and Wildlife, helped us with a grant that helped really kick us off, them and Metabolic Studio. And then I want to introduce Marie. Well, just wave your hand, Michelle, so people know. Yay, there's Michelle.
Yeah, you see a big caterpillar over my head.
Oh, yes, you do. And then I want to thank Marie for organizing all of these. Honestly, as many of you know, this is her 2nd year AmeriCorps service year with us. And she and I met before she agreed to do a 2nd year. And I promised her, well, year 2 will be different. We will make sure year 2 is very different from year 1. And neither one of us could have imagined how different it was going to be. She's done an amazing job of turning all of our education program with kids and the Pollinator Garden to virtual events. We're learning a lot as we go, and she's just done an amazing job. So kudos to Marie, and I'm going to turn it over to Marie now to take it from here. So thank you, Marie.
Thanks, Kay. Just real quick, before we get started, a brief intro for any of you who aren't familiar with our Eastside Pollinator Garden project. This series of workshops is a part of that project. And with that, we work with local community members to help certify gardens as pollinator friendly. And basically what that entails is there's an initial garden visit where we just kind of go over the certification criteria and ideas of your garden and a little bit more about the program. And then there's a check-in visit, which if you've met all the criteria other than having the plants in the ground, you'd get a voucher for the California Native Plant Society sale, the fall sale, which is happening. It's gonna, as far as I know right now, we've spent a lot of time working to figure it out, and it's gonna be in an online format where you order online and then pick up at White Mountain Research Station. So I'll know more about that as it gets closer, and I will try to keep you all updated on that. And then there's a final garden visit to make sure plants are in the ground, and then you get a certification sign. And I really want to thank all of our partners on this project, on this workshop series. We've worked a lot with California Native Plant Society, Inyo Master Gardeners, Eastern Sierra Audubon Society, University of Nevada, Reno, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and just huge thank you to all the many participants and presenters for this workshop series. And an even bigger thank you to Metabolic Studio, who is funding the project this year. So I wouldn't be able to do it without all of our amazing partners. And I don't want to take away from Michelle for too much longer. Michelle is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist and has lots of experience teaching youth as the former Schoolyard Habitat coordinator, has done many presentations, and as Kay mentioned, has been involved in our Pollinator Garden project for a long time. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to try to share my screen now and go to the presentation. And if you could, feel free to write down your questions, and at the end, I'll try to answer as many as I can.
Cool.
All right, can everyone see Monarch butterfly life cycle?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite organisms, the monarch butterfly. I'm sure that's something that a lot of you have been thinking about or interested in. And we'll talk a little bit about how the monarch makes its way through the world and how we can help conserve this species. So a lot of people are like, why would they be called monarchs? And anyways, in the parentheses is the scientific name. So some people think that it came from King William III, who was called Prince William of Orange before he became king. Iconic, it's probably the most well-known butterfly in the world. They migrate really long distances to overwinter, and they're an important cultural symbol in Mexico. So monarchs arrive in Mexico during Dia de los Muertos, which is Day of the Dead, and people believe they carry the souls of their ancestors. So there's 3 different butterflies, including the monarch, that look pretty similar. So I'm going to put them up on the screen, and we'll just talk a little bit about how you can tell which one is a monarch. So here's one, another, there's the third. So take a look and see if you can figure out which one is the monarch. So it is not that one, that's the queen butterfly. It looks a little bit similar. It's an orange butterfly, but it doesn't have the black wing veins like the other 2. This one is the tricky one. It's the viceroy, but you can see it has a second line through the rear wings. And then, of course, the top one is the monarch. So monarch life cycle. So, of course, the female monarch lays her eggs on milkweed because that's the only thing that caterpillars can eat. And it takes about a month for a monarch to grow and change into an adult butterfly. And the neat thing about milkweed is it sequesters cardenolides so that when the caterpillar eats the milkweed, it becomes distasteful to predators. And that's the same thing with the adult butterfly. So here is an egg. If you look at the top left photo, you can see next to the person holding the milkweed, do you see that little tiny dot next to her thumbnail? That is the size of an egg. And then up close, you can see, of course, it's a close-up of the egg. The interesting thing is a lot of people, when they're looking for monarch eggs, sometimes the milkweed has little sap bubbles, and it can kind of look like an egg. But if you have what a lot of botanists use, the little hand lens, that's a great thing to go around with if you're looking for eggs, because the eggs will have those little ridges. So the females lay about 500 eggs over 2 to 5 weeks. So here is a picture of the egg and then the 5 instars, which are the different stages of the caterpillar. So each instar lasts about 2 to 3 days, and the caterpillars grow up to about 2,000 times their original mass. So that's the first, and then of course you can see the size difference. The first does not even look like the 5th to me. So the first instar, it doesn't really have those characteristic, really bright stripes like you would find on the other instars, and that's because this this caterpillar has not started eating milkweed yet. So it takes the diet of milkweed to give it that really bright color. And the interesting thing is, I just learned this last year, is that the first meal of the caterpillar is actually the egg capsule. So when it comes out, it digests the egg capsule. And then here you have some other little tiny caterpillars, and then the little black dots are caterpillar frass. So the second instar, they start to get those diagnostic tentacles, and then it's diagnostic, the stripes, the yellow and black stripes of a monarch. So at the second instar, they're about 6 to 9 millimeters. And the interesting thing is the first and second instars, they chew little like circular holes in the milkweed. So here's the third instar. You can see actually the skin on the upper left as it's molted. And so these ones have tentacles in front that extend to the tip of the head. So the reason why we talk about the different tentacles is that's the easiest way to tell what instar you're looking at. So by the fourth instar, they are pretty good size. They're about 13 to 25 millimeters. And the front tentacles extend beyond the head. And the last one, the front tentacles extend beyond the head and droop down to the ground. And that's how you know you're looking at a fifth instar. And then of course, they go into that classic larval stage where they hang in a J. And when I was a kid, there was just out in the weedy parts of our yard that we could always find a caterpillar, and we used to bring them inside. And I'm sure some of you have already had done that as a kid as well, because monarchs used to be much more plentiful. So here it is, it's spinning its chrysalis. So when it does this, it spins a silk button. There's a spinneret, which is below its mandibles. And so it spins that, and then it hangs upside down for 12 to 18 hours, after which it molts, leaving a shiny green pupa. I mean, I just love the monarch chrysalises. They're so pretty to me. So here you can see when a monarch is coming out of the chrysalis, they call that eclosing. So it takes about 10 to 14 days after it's in the chrysalis, and you can start to see the pigmentation of the wing through the chrysalis. So in terms of telling which butterfly is the female is the one on the left. She has larger or wider wing veins, and the male is on the right. You can see those little dots. Those are called androconial patches, and they don't think there's any purpose in these for the monarch species. Both sexes drink nectar, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but there's migratory and non-migratory generations, and the non-migratory ones live 2 to 4 weeks as adults. So migration, a lot of people don't realize that there are 2 migratory populations in the US and a non-migratory one in southern Florida. So they are all the same species, they just have different life cycles. The monarchs that you would see in Nevada or around the Great Basin area in Bishop usually migrate to California. The ones that are east of the Rockies migrate to Mexico, and then Arizona has some that go either to California or Mexico. So that's kind of interesting that they have some that do both. So how do they find where they're going? So I think this is really interesting that they have an internal compass, and the compass uses a clock which is stored in the antennae. This is fascinating to me. When they've done experiments where they cover up the antennae, and it can cause some issues with orientation. And also the sun's location, which is determined using the large compound eyes. So this is for the Western US. There's really what they think to be 4 generations, and it means 4 different life cycles. There's a spring, and then a May, June, July, August, and a September, March generation. And the September to March generation lives about 9 months, and the rest live up to 10 weeks. And the longer one is called a super generation. So if you see one in September and it's moving towards California, it's probably that super generation going to winter in California. So this is how we count monarchs in the Western US. And if people like to get out and do what's called a citizen science project, where you help scientists look up really or determine important information on a species, this is something that would be great to participate in. And so what they do is they go out and they count individual monarchs on the trees in these different wintering spots in California. And you can see we're really concerned because our efforts have increased. We have a ton of different sites monitored. It looks like a little over 250. And the green bars are the population over time. So back in 1997, we were over 1 million. And as you can see, the past 2 years have been really, really low for monarchs. So last year was 29,000 and something. So the migratory monarchs in this part of the US, and we'll talk a little bit about the eastern ones, they're really struggling right now. So here in Mexico, due to the larger quantity of monarchs, they look at hectares, or how many acres, or how much area is occupied by monarch colonies at overwintering sites in Mexico. I always want to say acres because that's what we usually look at here in this country, but in Mexico it'd be hectares. And as you can see, at the high point, it looks like there was over 18 hectares, and you can see we were really excited in 2018 and 19 because we were back up to about 6 hectares, but then last year we were back down again in terms of numbers. So Western and Eastern population numbers have been declining precipitously. So why? What happened? So the weather has been an issue. If it's below a certain temperature, monarchs can freeze. They can get sick or preyed upon. Pesticide use, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And habitat loss. And this is something that's kind of interesting. I don't know if anyone has heard of, and this is a mouthful, it's called Ophrocystic electroschira, which people, because of it's a mouthful, they say OE. And that's actually a protozoan parasite. And so the larvae can ingest the spores as they eat the milkweed or their eggshells. So the female leaves the spores when she lays the eggs. So heavily infested individuals, or ones with a high parasite load, they give these a number, I think it's like 1 to 3. So ones that are heavily infested, they're less likely to live as long as healthy adults and may have trouble migrating. This one is called a tachinid fly. It's kind of like a science fiction-y type thing. The fly parasite parasitizes the monarch by laying eggs in the larvae. The fly larvae burrow in, eating from the inside out, and then the larvae of flies comes out of the caterpillar or chrysalis on a string tendril. So this causes the monarch to die. So let's see if I figured out where there was a pointer earlier, but I can't. Can you all see this? This is the little tachinid fly. So here we talked about the weather. If it's too cold, they can't fly. They'll die if it gets too much below freezing. That's why they migrate. And climate change can be posing a threat as conditions are changing. So here you're looking at a large-scale mortality due to a weather event. Predators. So it's kind of interesting. Most birds won't eat monarchs, but a few species of birds are immune to them. The black-backed oriole and the black-headed grosbeak, so they can eat those without getting sick. But other things, other invertebrates can also eat monarchs. So pesticides, that's a big topic right now. There's a new class of pesticides called neonicotinoids. And that is really, in my opinion, one of the most concerning class of pesticides. It's a systemic pesticide, so it kills the beneficial insects along with the good insects. So sometimes it'll be in a seed coat before you plant the seed. Sometimes it'll be in the soil. Sometimes it'll be in the plant. And what happens is it produces, the plant will then, if it flowers, produce poison nectar and poison pollen. So I couldn't find this photo, but I did see a photo where someone purchased milkweed commercially, and everything that, all the eggs that developed into caterpillars then died because the actual milkweed was poisoning the monarchs. So if you see a sign, like if you go to a big box store and there's a little label that says protected against pests or whatnot, that means it's probably been sprayed. And you can even find, which is crazy to me, you can find like butterfly bush that's been pre-sprayed. So it's what's called a population sink. It attracts the pollinators, but then the pollinators come and nectar on it and then they die. So it's a really big issue. So what I always suggest is go to your local nursery. I think you have some nice nurseries in the Bishop area, and talk to them about where they get their plants. Most nurseries don't grow the plants on site, so they get them from growers. And if they have a good relationship with their grower can say, okay, such and such a plant is pollinator friendly. Like most people probably aren't worried if they get a house plant that's not going to be exposed to any, or pollinators won't be exposed to. But your outdoor plants, you really want to know if they have been sprayed. So here's an example of what happened when someone sprayed when they shouldn't have. It was a flowering tree. I think they were linden trees, and the pesticide was sprayed during the day when pollinators were on the tree, and this caused every single bumblebee on the tree to die. So if people do use pesticides, they should do it at nighttime or when things aren't blooming or when the wind is not, strong. So there's a lot of factors to consider. But if you're doing a small scale backyard habitat, I always encourage people to use, it doesn't have to be certified as organic, but just don't use any of these pesticides. So they've done some research. They did a laboratory study, which was kind of sad to me. David James did this. Not that they did the study, but the results that shows that one neonicotinoid was given to adult monarchs, and it caused almost 80% of the treated individual adults to die versus a normal background death of 20%. So that shows just how toxic these neonicotinoids are to pollinators. In a second study, they've been looking at the Central Valley is where most of us get our vegetables from, but it's a highly mechanized form of agriculture. And so they went out, they collected some milkweed, and they found an average of 9 compounds per plant. And so this shows how common or ubiquitous these chemicals are in the environment. So, and especially if this happens in an early summer window when monarch larvae are likely to be present, this really can be an issue. So they think that pesticide exposure could be a really big factor in contributing to monarch declines in the Western US. So everyone has seen that the West is also really developing quickly. We're losing habitat at a really fast rate. And that's why organizations like the Eastern Sierra Land Trust that work to keep land in, in its natural uses or with positive, proactive farmers and grazers, we really need that. Once it's lost to development, it's lost for a really long time. So Mexico, they're having issues with illegal logging. And in Mexico, they only go to this one kind of forest, and it's called oyamel. And once that's logged, there's not going to be a place for these monarchs to roost throughout the winter. They really need these specific climatic conditions, or they're not going to make it through the winter. So herbicide tolerant crops. So when soybean or Roundup Ready soybean or corn is planted, it means that plant can survive being sprayed with pesticides, but when they go in and spray, everything else that would normally be there would die. So for example, in old-timey agriculture, you would probably find milkweed hanging out on the corners of the farm, in between the corn or the beans. But when you go and spray with this modern form of agriculture, you'll have nothing left besides the crop. So here you can see an example, which I thought was kind of interesting, is if you look at how much Roundup Ready or herbicide tolerant soybeans and corn farming has increased. I mean, it's just gone up exponentially, starting with soybeans around 1997. And corn looks like it's about a little bit later, but 2004. So that's very, very common these days. So California, everyone knows that California is a really popular place. Everyone wants to live there. But we've really got to focus on preserving these really important wintering spots for Western monarchs. You can see that's Santa Cruz, a very heavily developed place, but that little circle on the bottom right is Lighthouse Field, and it's a monarch mecca. So we need to keep these, meccas or undeveloped places, we need to keep these wild, because as you can see, there's not a lot of other spots for them right now. Climate change. So they're finding that monarchs are leaving the wintering ground earlier. And this is a problem because many varieties of milkweed haven't sprouted and are not big enough for the monarch to use. And it is possible that monarchs are also migrating later, so fall nectar availability could be an issue. So we'll talk a little bit about when you do your backyard gardens, really kind of everything's important in terms of plants, but really focus on getting some of those late blooming plants in your garden. And a lot of people kind of rabbit brush has a bad name. I'll just throw in this is something I always mention. I feel like a rabbit brush advocate, but that is one of the best plants, one of the best late blooming plants for pollinators. So what is my agency doing? The Fish and Wildlife Service is about to come out with a species status assessment, and that will happen in December of this year. And that helps us determine whether something should go on the Endangered Species Act, which the point of that is to help recover a species that isn't doing well. So, and I don't want you to get too discouraged because we can still make a difference, but the Western monarchs has a probability of going extinct of 98% in 60 years or less, and 60% in 10 years. So this is really, you know, the individual monarchs will probably persist, but the migratory phenomenon is really what we're worried about. So I'll be anxious to see, you know, what happens when they come up with this determination. So what can we do about it? There's a lot of things that individuals can do. And I had to put in this, I love these photos. So I don't know how many of you have been in Bishop for a while, but Eastern Sierra Land Trust started when they converted their habitat at their office. You can see in the photo in the upper left, this is lawn. And so it's like in English, when people colonized the US, they wanted to bring that sort of English garden look with them. And a lawn looks pretty, it's nice for dogs or whatnot, or people to lie on, but it's not good for pollinators. You might get a little bit of clover in there, but grass is wind blown. So, or the pollen from the grass is wind blown. So it's not something that'll help pollinators. So, I mean, I encourage people, if you're working on your yard, you might want to leave a tiny patch of grass, but the rest should be put into native plants, which are what helps pollinators the most. So it's a work in progress, but you can see on the bottom right, they have taken out their lawn, and I believe, and Kay can correct me, I think they solarized it for a while, where they put, I think it was plastic on there, and that kills, you need to really prep your garden well. So that kills all the weed seeds that are in the soil. And then it leaves like kind of a blank canvas for your pollinator garden.
Exactly. And oh, Michelle, I was just gonna say, yes, we did. And I'd just like to say, John, who is on the call, super volunteer. He came multiple times with the huge rototiller and helped us get that lawn up, which was a huge project just to get that lawn torn up and out. And then we did solarize. So kudos to John.
Yeah, thank you. How does it look this year? Is it still going?
It is still going. Absolutely. You know, things are a little bit different because no one's working in the office all the time right now, but Marie is still going and taking care of things. And it was beautiful in, was that May, Marie? I think when everything was blooming. Yeah, it was gorgeous. So
yeah,
thank you, Michelle.
I mean, last time I was out there, I think it was 2 years ago. It's just like, I think about what it looked like before and what it looks like now. And has someone looked at how many different pollinators come in there?
We haven't had, you know, we had the Urban Bee Lab come for a couple years, and that grant ran out, and no one has come for the last 2 years. And since I think Rachel did, when Rachel Williams was here, she did a light assessment, but you know, she's not here anymore either. So that's something we need to do.
Yeah.
There were plans, just one quick thing. There were plans for a combined citizen science project and surveys to happen this year. And those haven't happened. So it was going to happen maybe next year.
So yeah, you want to make sure, of course, that you have the host plant, which is the milkweed. The caterpillars can't eat anything else. Nectar plants, you want things that bloom spring, summer, and fall. Water, you can use a little puddler, which sometimes can just be a drip emitter over a little like plant bottom or plant pot bottom. And then of course shelter. And their habitat offers everything that a pollinator would like. Also bare ground for native bees, and native bees really like, many of them are ground nesters, so they like that bare ground. So here is another type of citizen science you can do. It's called the Monarch Waystation program. And basically you create your small backyard habitat. It doesn't have to be gigantic. They prefer a couple kinds of milkweed and then several kinds of blooming nectar plants. And then you can register it, and that way we can get an idea about how many folks are working on their habitat in their yards to help monarchs and other pollinators. So I really love the Monarch Waystation program. I don't think it's very expensive. I think it's $20-something, and then you can also get a sign that says Pollinator Habitat or Monarch Waystation. I'm not sure exactly. I think the sign might look like the logo on the upper left. Plant milkweed, of course. The kinds that grow a lot around Reno are the showy milkweed and the narrow leaf, and I believe you have both of those kinds in Bishop. And I always want to throw in a caveat that milkweed isn't just for monarchs. It's really, you know, an attractive plant, and it's a really good nectar pollen plant, so it's good for other things like this swallowtail butterfly. And I had to throw in this slide. This is one of my favorite ones. I borrowed it from Lincoln Brower. So I was saying that only a couple kinds of birds can eat monarchs, and here's one. What do you think this blue jay is doing? It tried to eat a monarch, and it really didn't like it, so it spit it out. And imagine capturing this photo. I just love it, because nature photography, you look at, you know, say National Geographic, and this is just a tangent, but it's amazing. You think, how did that person get that picture? Because you don't see a blue jay doing this every day. So the nectar plants I was talking about. So you want to plant things that bloom spring, summer, and fall. And of course, natives are best, because our pollinating insects, you know, a lot of our food would not be here without pollinators. So you're not only helping pollinators, but you're helping yourself by providing habitat that will then help those insects pollinate crops. Natives are best. And I just made this little diagram. When you're doing your habitat, it's great to clump species together. And the reason why, they've done some studies, and they have found that it makes it a little easier for pollinators to find things. And on the right, you can see that little square box. I threw in a bat house just for fun, because even though there are pollinating bats, but our bats are insect eaters, but I still think it's neat to have, you know, some different types of things in your garden that can help other species as well. So different pollinators also, if you can put in some different colored plants, it's great. So bees like white, yellow, blue, or UV. Butterflies like red and purple. Hummingbirds, of course, like, you know, red and some other bright colors. So yeah, if you can put in a variety of colors, you'll get a variety of pollinators. So, and also using a different, you know, kind of a diverse palette of plants is good, because certain bees only go to certain types of plants. So on the left, you have a little squash bee, and of course it needs the squash plants. If you remember from the Eastern Sierra Land Trust slide, there was a lot of globe mallow in the photo. That's great for a globe mallow bee. So the more diverse your habitat is, probably the greater diversity of species you'll find in your habitat. So like I said, citizen science. Project Monarch Health is kind of neat. If you did, some people have netted monarchs, and you can gently place the monarch on a piece of sticky tape, and that will collect the spores for that OE parasite if the monarch has it. So then you just collect the card based on sticking the monarch, and it doesn't hurt the monarch. You just gently stick their abdomen on it, and then you mail off the cards, and they can do studies to see what the parasite load is on certain butterflies. And just as a side note, that's why they don't like tropical milkweed in places like Florida, because it doesn't die back in the fall. And what happens is that parasite load just keeps increasing on this milkweed. So like, for example, in Reno, and I assume it's the same for Bishop, our milkweed dies back every year. But if you're in a place warm enough for the plant to persist, it can be bad for the parasites. This is sometimes people, like I said, like to tag monarchs. And so, or I mentioned the parasite program, there's also the tagging program. And you can see this tiny little tag on the monarch's wing, and that helps scientists to know where that monarch goes. So it seems like it would be hard to see, but there are people with binoculars looking at monarchs when they can see them roosting to look for that tag. And see, if you can see on the left from Southwest Monarch Study, this is like kind of a complex diagram, but it tells us where those monarchs went. Otherwise, we don't know what individuals or which individuals go where. And on the right, it might be a little hard to see, but they tagged a monarch in Gardnerville. The elementary kids actually did it. And then they found it. It had flown 305 miles to Santa Barbara. So that way we know that that monarch went all the way down to that part of California, which is kind of neat. So I just want to put in a, you know, a push for the fact that we can make a difference. Sometimes the numbers look a little grim, but backyard habitat, kind of my dream is for everyone to have little micro habitats, and hopefully over time that'll be able to make a difference. So yeah, they can exist in disturbed and pristine habitats that are shared with other pollinators. It was funny, we put some in a schoolyard habitat here, which is in a really, really urban area. I can't even stress enough how urban it is. And we had some good milkweed patches, and a couple months later the teacher sent me a picture and they already had caterpillars on their milkweed. So it's just really rewarding when you can get that to happen in your own yard. They're interesting. We still have a lot to learn from them. I mean, my biggest concern is losing that migration. So I want to do all we can do to help this species persist. And I guess now I'll take questions. I just wanted to say thank you that a lot of this slide was taken from the Monarch joint venture. I borrowed some information from Dr. Tom Landis, who helps with our Monarch programming here. He comes and usually presents on monarchs, and then Dr. David James and others. So there's a lot of people who are out there helping us with these monarchs. So on that note, I will end the formal part, and I may not know the answer to every question, but I'll try.
Do you see the one that's there from John?
I do not see any yet. I was gonna have
Okay.
you, and let me see if I can do I stop sharing now?
I can read
Yeah.
them too if it's easier.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easier for me. I don't have very good eyesight.
Okay.
John has asked, what do the squash bees eat?
So those are native bees. Most of them are solitary, besides like bumblebees. Some of them can be colonial, but they'll actually take pollen, and they lay one egg per brood chamber. So they'll take the pollen back to the brood chamber. And so bees will, you know, they'll consume the nectar and the pollen. So there's 4,000 kinds of bees, native bees in the United States. And so honeybees, which are the most well-known, are actually from Europe. So yeah, some plants don't produce pollen. There's some that just produce nectar. So if you can, you want to put in ones that produce pollen and nectar.
This is from Laura. What is the minimum size your garden should be to attract monarchs? Should it be 100% milkweed or at least 50%, or what?
I think, and I'll have to go back and look at the Monarch Watch requirements for Monarch Waystation requirements. I think it's 10 milkweed plants. So 2 different species if you can, and then at least 5 other species of blooming plants. So, I mean, I would just say, put in what you can. You know, if it's a small space, it still won't hurt to put in 10 milkweed plants, and then try to put in, I would say, 3 of each species. Say if you had 5 other species of flowering plants, try to put in 3 of each of those. So that'd be 15 pollinator plants plus 10 milkweed. So I think you could get something in for a couple of 100 square feet or even 100 square feet. Yeah, just go ahead and try. I don't think, like I said, nothing's too small. Even if you don't get monarchs, I wouldn't be discouraged, because some of our bees are also suffering. So if you have milkweed and you get these native bees, you're making a difference as well. I always call, like, you know, monarchs are kind of a gateway species. They get people excited about our other pollinators.
Awesome. Another question is, I see the orange and red milkweed everywhere, but I heard it can be harmful in terms of delaying migration, etc.
Yeah, so if you're in a place where you don't get a hard freeze and the milkweed, like our milkweed, you can't even see it in the winter. It dies back and then resprouts in the spring. But if you're somewhere where you don't get those frosts, like in Florida, as I was mentioning, you'll get those OE parasites will keep building up, and then it can impact the health of the monarch. Plus it might delay their migration. So tropical milkweed is something we don't want to plant. Plus it's not native. So I would look into what species of milkweed are native. Besides, we have quite a few in Nevada. So I'm not sure what is available from your local nursery. I think in the past you were able to get showy and narrow leaf. So
yep.
And I believe there's a couple of good nurseries in Bishop, right?
Mm-hmm. And this actually relates to John's question, which is, can we get milkweed at a nursery? Around here, the best place I would probably recommend is the California Native Plant Society sale. Katie Quinlan does a wonderful job and has a lot of luck growing milkweed, and there's usually some available there. The other place might be Chalfont Big Trees, although I'm not positive on that one.
Yeah, and the Native Plant Society also has some of those other pollinator plants as well, yep. Correct? Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, when you get it from a place like that, from someone who cares about pollinators and is knowledgeable, they can just, and I'm sure Katie can probably tell you what, based on, you know, your elevation. I think Bishop has a variety of elevations. She can probably point you in the right direction in terms of what plants do well in what area.
And Galen just commented, it is easy to grow from seed too. And Galen, if you wouldn't mind, because I believe you do sell milkweed seeds at the Bishop Paiute Tribe Food Sovereignty Program. Is that? Yes. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Okay. Hi everyone. Sorry you can't see me. Like, I'm sitting in a cave.
I see you now.
So my name is Galen Kinsey, and I work for the Bishop Paiute Tribe's Food Sovereignty Program. And our program does run a seed library, and I have been going out on the COSA in the fall time and gathering seed, so then we can distribute it to the community for free. I think we might have some seed available right now. If you're interested, just send me a private message and I can send you the form for ordering seeds from us.
Awesome. And if you also want to email me that form, I can send it out to people too, Galen.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm just gonna say that also getting them from your local area is best, because they're doing a lot of research, right seed, right place, right time. If you buy seeds from Oregon, they might not do that well in California and Nevada. It's
Yeah, ours have the genetics.
what species are you finding in the Cosa?
Right now we're offering tuberosa,
Oh,
which is the showy, and then fascicularis, the fine leafed one too. I don't think we have any of that available right now. So we do have the showy milkweed, and those are both native species to the Owens Valley. So, yep.
yeah, the
Awesome.
showy I just love, because I mean, if I had a big yard, I think I would just cover it with showy milkweed. It's a really pretty plant, and it's blooming here in Reno now.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaylee. Let's see, what else do we have for questions? Harriet, not a question, but kids always ask the difference between chrysalis and cocoon.
Same thing. Pupa, chrysalis, cocoon. How many of you raised caterpillars as a kid, or raised monarchs, when collected them and watched them go through their life cycle? No one? We did that all. Yeah.
Yeah, I did that. Harriet says she's grown milkweed by digging up a portion of another plant and planting some root culture.
Yeah, you can also
Kinda.
use rhizomes.
Mhm.
So you can collect those and just stick them in the ground. So the nice thing about milkweed is once you get it going, you know, it is kind of a weed, so it does pretty well. And if you use native plants, you don't have to use any fertilizer, because they're used to this desert soil. They don't need any, they do need water during establishment, but other than that, they don't need a lot. Lots of sun too.
And then a question I missed earlier is, do milkweed aphids affect the butterflies or just the plant?
I don't think they affect the butterfly or the butterflies. And I don't think they really damage the plant either, but if you don't like watching them, the aphid, you could just take a water hose and spray them off your plants. Of course, I wouldn't put any chemicals on anything, because if you do something to kill the aphids, like I said, it might kill the other beneficial insects in your garden.
Awesome. Oh, we have some more. A few weeks ago, there was lots of showy milkweed growing next to the canal south of town in Bishop. Last week, LADWP mowed the edges. Can someone stand up for the butterflies and ask DWP to stop mowing?
Yeah, I know the same thing happens in Fallon here. I think there's the folks that do the monitoring of the canals are trying to keep the vegetation down, but I don't know, do you all have a relationship with any of the LAWDP folks that you could talk to them about that?
Yeah, we do. We can at least put this request in. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask. And sometimes,
Yeah.
like when I show people pictures of milkweed, they're surprised that, you know, like that it's in their yard and they didn't know what it was. So sometimes people might be cutting it back just because they don't know. Another concern we get here in Nevada is people wondering if it's going to kill their livestock. And, you know, studies have shown that it's only damaging, or it's mostly damaging, if that's the only thing, say, for example, a cow had to eat. So they did do a study a long time ago, and they kind of enclosed cows in an area with just milkweed, and it does make them sick. But when they're out on the range, you know, milkweed's always been a traditional native plant. So I think my guess is that they're going to take a bite and spit out the milkweed because it doesn't taste good.
Harriet also has said, seems like many are obsessed by monarchs. Don't know if this diminishes the importance of other beneficials.
I really don't think so, because when people get really excited about monarchs, then they start thinking about what monarchs need, and a lot of what monarchs need in terms of habitat, say, for example, not using pesticides, controlling for development, allowing some natural areas to persist and other things like that. You know, you're helping, they think there's over 1,000 kinds of native bees in Nevada. So if you have a backyard habitat with these blooming plants and some open areas for natives, you're going to help the bees, you're going to help the pollinating beetles, you're going to help the hummingbirds. Yeah, I just think that it's going to get people more interested in other species out on the landscape.
It's called milkweed because it can be invasive like a weed, and it has a milky sap. Is this correct?
Yeah, it has a little milky sap, and it used to be really common before people started eliminating it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other last minute questions?
Yeah, and feel free, my contact information is up there. Feel free to send me an email. And y'all are fortunate to have Eastern Sierra Land Trust there. I also want to say that they're a great organization to work with, and they're doing so much good on the landscape that I love working with our nonprofit partners, because they just, we can't, the federal government, we can't do it all alone. Partnerships are the way things get done.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great working with you. You're so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick before we go, if Michelle, if you could actually stop sharing your screen, I'm just going to share one quick thing. Perfect.
Technology.
Yep, we're getting there.
It's awesome.
There we go. So just wanted to share a little bit more about some of our events we have coming up. On July 28th, we're going to have our virtual Happy Place Book Club meeting. We just had our first book this past month, and the next one is going to be Richard Powers' The Overstory. And haven't read it yet, but heard it's a great read and a great book. I would love to discuss it with anyone who's interested. So feel free to shoot me an email if you're interested in that. And then Kay, I'll let you talk about this a little bit more, but in late August, we're going to be having our virtual Lands and Legacy celebration. And if you want to share a little bit more about that, Kay.
Sure. Just real quickly, you know, we usually have this, it's a 3-day event sometime during the summer. And obviously this year, we're not going to be doing that. So we're turning it into a virtual event. And it's going to be structured very differently. We're still planning it, but look for more exciting news about sometime in the last couple weeks of August. We'll have multiple events that you can sign in for. Interviews, we're trying to get Jack Muir laws. We'll have interviews with landowners. We'll have days out on the land with our stewardship manager. And we're just going to do some fun things like little hour blips throughout that week leading up to the fun event at the end of the week. So stay tuned.
Yeah, innovation's the
yeah. It's true.
And thank you, Marie. You've been great to work with as well.
Thank you. And then all of our recordings are available on our website now.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And this one will be soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Really appreciate you coming. And Michelle, thank you so much.